to Vengeance. It was inspired by Devil May Cry and developed for 3 months, starting a year ago, counting 2026. I will waste no time and get to the early concepts, early gameplay, and all of the inspirations that I can find from back in the day. Let's begin. This logo was meant to be used by default, but then it was switched to this one to avoid spoilers and possible action that is within Aoni 2 Vengeance, as it was meant to be a surprise factor that Hiroshi takes back his vengeance, picks up the sword and starts slaying Aonis. Originally this was the logo, but it was then cancelled for another one. Originally it was red with an Aoni icon next to it. This was inspired by Devil May Cry 2, but then it was dismissed to a purple one that we know. These are the possible names that were thought of during the process of this game development. Aoni 2 Vengeance was chosen obviously. Before the development began, these were the original models that were used in Aoni 2 Vengeance first chapter, which is Hiroshi's dream. And speaking of that, the early development of first chapter actually had cleaner textures. Whenever you interact with doors, objects, or puzzle props, there is a text indicating what it is or what you cannot do. It was inspired by Devil May Cry 1. And as you can see in this gameplay chapter, textures are very clean. Also for a fact, most of the user interface elements were inspired by Devil May Cry 2. And all of the gameplay was actually developed before the chapters themselves. The entire Aoni shop that you see on the screen right now is also heavily inspired by Devil May Cry 2's Divine Statue layout. The upgrade, since Devil May Cry 2 doesn't have proper weapon upgrades that include the moves, the weapon upgrade UI was completely original. And as you can see right here, this is very early user interface of play chart currency. It was later replaced to a 3D one. Menus are also inspired by Devil May Cry 2. The whole aesthetic of user interface is inspired by Devil May Cry 2 in general. This is also section 3 or section 2 gameplay with super early textures, with less furniture added. Very early. Early into the development, when ideas were gathered, these were the maga's earliest designs, until the final one was chosen, with this early texture in development as well. In fact, this is the first sword design that was inspired by Alastair from Devil May Cry 1. Early health bars. Early Hiroshi model in process. I will also show Hiroshi concepts here. There is also a scrap boss called Encephalo Oni. It was due to rigging problems with its tentacles. This is also the early Heart of Wise concept art that was actually used in Aoni 3 instead of Aoni 2. This is the final design that was chosen for Aoni 2. Fun fact about the Blob Oni boss that was not executed properly in the final game. It was supposed to be a blob inspired by the older encounters in like way older Aoni versions, where he slowly creeps up to you. In Aoni 2 Vengeance, he was supposed to creep up to you as you grab the key. It was supposed to be a mini boss battle. The original Blob Oni boss was inspired by Jagatkum from Devil May Cry 2. Fun fact, before developing Aoni to Vengeance, I came up to Thorlick Gaming to ask him if he actually likes action games. Grotesque statue that you see on the screen was actually supposed to be an upgrade station, but it was scrapped and used to be a prop destroyer instead. A prop that you destroyed to progress further into the game. I think it was somewhere between section 6. Actually, later in the development, as it was coming to an end, he was animated, rigged, and placed to be a pre-final boss before the game ends. There are also Metal Gear Rising inspirations, including the scene where Hiroshi points his sword at Hunchback Oni, Raiden's foot, attaching anything metal, and that inspiration was used in Twin Blades. There's also another Metal Gear Rising inspiration for Squatto. Speaking of Squatto, before developing the chapters themselves, he was actually more fair. You could cut his rocks, and I think you still can. It was just not really noticed during the gameplay. And his boss fight seemed more fun than it was in the final state. And for a fact, Squatto throwing boulders at the player was inspired by my Garry's Mod Aoni pack. And I think Squatto teleporting on top of you was inspired by Aaron Guerrera from Devil May Cry 2, but I do not remember, to be honest. I will also show the early gameplay footage of bosses that were made before the chapters themselves, as well the early weapons. While this is playing, I also want to show some of the concept arts that were made for the weapons. They were also developed before the chapters themselves, so everything including NPCs, the hiding closets, the props, the models were all made before chapters. And somehow, I think Roblox broke some segments of bosses, including Squatto, because he was not that unfair in the final game, and I do not remember adjusting him whatsoever to be like that. Unironically, the weapon switching system was also inspired by Devil May Cry 2. Crew had some trouble modeling Blockman, so here are some two early variants of him. There's also an early version of Blockman's theme music, which I will play right now. By the way, the projection that Ocarina Oni sends is Hiroshi with a dark face. He also looks pretty funny. I also use Devil May Cry animations as references, including for movements, walk, and running animations. And since I was new to sword animations, I didn't really know how to like animate it properly. I used Devil May Cry 2's moveset as inspiration. Also some prop textures, prop models again, and some map layout. And for another fact, I originally did not know how to properly model PS2 humans, but I did know how to properly model PS2 monsters, which is why I went for a crappy PSX style. Aoni 2 Bloodbath was actually inspired by Devil May Cry 2's Bloody Palace. Some early graphics made in the end of the game. It was originally very bright and not that 3D. There's also Turbo mode that was added at the end of development, where multiple enemies spawn. Fun fact, the original scene where Hiroshi gets his Magus for the first time was inspired by Devil May Cry 1 scene of Alaster. The quote-unquote promotional poster was also inspired by Devil May Cry 1's promotional poster. I Need to Vengeance was also originally planned to be Christian. Dante from Devil May Cry 2 dropping sacred items for Arius. That was used in the ending of I Need to Vengeance. It was also used to explain why in the next title that was possible. Why Hiroshi ended up with no weapons from the previous game. Fun fact, the ending theme for Aoni to Vengeance was inspired by Heads or Tails. Again, Devil May Cry 2. Another fun fact about the music, I told my composer Nashkodi to actually make the soundtrack sound like Devil May Cry 2. And again, about user interface, the menu selection was actually inspired by Devil May Cry 2 as well. Since the video is ending, I'd like to showcase all of the concept art that I could possibly find. next, maybe. Next time on Java's Hub.